So welcome to the Holistic Horse Conference. I'm Dr. Jeff Grognet, and along with my co-host,
I'm Joan Ranquet, animal communicator.
okay, so we are proud to have Sarah Griffiths. And Sarah is a classically trained homeopathic practitioner and also a species-specific animal nutritionist. She has 20 years of clinical experience and has a background in wildlife and, the key, equine management and 10 years of veterinary mentorship. Sarah's created her own unique protocols to help animals live better quality lives. She works with pet parents as well, and also equine guardians to provide the solutions that complement epigenetic expressions of the individual species. She has two Canadian companies, the Animal Synergist and the Equus Soap Company. So with that, welcome, Sarah.
Hi, how are you guys?
Good. And I just have to say that you don't look old enough to have had 20 years worth of experience.
Oh,
But
thank you. I did start my wildlife management when I was 17 years old. So I've been
okay.
so
Okay.
that does help me out a little bit.
It does. When you get to my age, it's kind of like, God, they're younger. Well, they're all younger now, so that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
I'm even starting to feel that way too. So I go to the
Yeah,
grocery store and I'm like, everyone's a child.
yeah. So anyway, the topic you're going to hit is equine colic and equine ulcers.
Yes.
And as a veterinarian, I mean, when I first graduated, which was before you were born, almost. Anyway, when I graduated, it was something that, yeah, we kind of suspected, but we didn't have a good way to diagnose it.
Yeah.
And then they invented a thing called a scope. And
Yes.
then all of a sudden it was, too many horses have got this problem, right? So that's what we're talking about. So with that, how often do horses get ulcers and colic?
Well, I did a really deep dive on this last year when I was writing a bunch of articles, and I wanted the references for those statistics. So I dug up the two biggest meta-analyses that I could find, one's from the UK and one's from the States. And the consensus is that between 70 and 90% of domestic horses have some level of ulcers, which is pretty scary. Um, Obviously, they can be like mild to like stage 4, which is very severe. But that statistic, if that existed in humans, we would all be screaming and running around and making a big deal about it. So, and I did pull a bunch of statistics on the rate at which horses are colicking in relation to ulcer diagnosis, and that is quite high as well. So horses that are having recurrent colics, even if they're mild colics where they're recovering fairly decently on their own, if that starts happening on a regular basis, the risk of death goes up every time they go through a colic episode. And if there's an underlying problem with a GI system disease, then that will worsen unless you make some changes. So that's kind of where I started to focus, because I was so shocked that that was the statistic for horses. And because I was showing my horses, and I completely changed my whole trajectory with my horses after I learned these statistics and realized, like, it was a big aha moment for me to change a lot to do with their management and their diets, and just how much they're moving, and all of these things affect their GI health, which seems crazy, but it's kind of a central hub for checking on their overall health, because it's such a huge system in horses. So
Yeah, and I would love to dig in on that a little bit further too, because I've, like you, you probably boarded your horse at some point. I mean, thankfully, I have my horses here and
Yeah.
have a little track system, but you know, uh, so many people don't have that gift in their life where the animals are just right outside their door, and so they can't control the situation. And I mean, I've always heard that like performance horses, and like you, I stopped showing at
Mhm.
a young age. So, what like the lifestyle? I just want to start there, and then I want to talk about behavior for a moment, and then but the lifestyle that so many horses have when they live in a barn, and this is not a blame, but it's a call for how could we improve upon even the average animal that lives in a stall, 12 to 16 hours a day.
Yes. Yeah. So I think one of the main things that has to change is our management techniques with horses. We're certainly not doing them any favors. We've changed a lot of things about how we manage horses in the last 100 years because they've gone from having jobs to having being more like a
Luxury item.
yeah, like something that's more recreational as
Mm.
opposed to, being very essential. And because everything has just gotten so insanely expensive, hay and real estate and land and all of these things have skyrocketed in how much those things cost. So it started to put a lot of pressure on because horses are an animal that needs space. They need a lot of space. And in nature, if they're out and they're on a range, they move
They move.
like 16 to 20 kilometers a day, whereas a stalled horse or a paddocked horse that lives in a very small stall or paddock is doing between 800 and 1,000 steps a day, which is not even the same animal really at that point. So, and we know from all of the research that movement and it totally affects their whole digestive motility, their all of the motility and action and movement of their GI system is slower when they're not actually moving. So, which makes sense. So that's just one of many pieces. But when we think of those numbers and how different they are, and also another thing that I've kind of discovered because I kind of started a bit backwards with wildlife and working with wolves and all of these like wild like zebras and the Przewalski horses and
Right.
all of these horses and animals that are eating these species specific diets. um, and that was my first encounter with feeding, was through these conservation centers that I was volunteering at. And and then I progressed over to like a veterinary assistant job and started working in the vet world, and everything was on a shelf in a bag.
Mm.
And I was also working with the wolves there. The people who I was working for, they were very adamant that these animals need to eat meat and they need to they need to have this very specific diet. But then dogs were completely different somehow, and I could never wrap my brain around that. And then so I've been doing that for a long time, species specific for dogs and cats. But then I realized that horses actually need more help on this front than even the dogs and cats do, because there's quite a big movement now on the front of dogs and cats eating
Yeah.
species specific. But with horses, there aren't even really any guidelines for what does that actually mean for a horse. So I started pulling statistics from feral horse studies where people are going out and actually DNA testing the manure of these feral horses to find out like how many plant species are they eating, what are they eating seasonally, and how are like what parts of the plant. It's different at different times of the year. And they actually, one of the biggest studies that was done over a year, with three herds, with three feral herds, they discovered that they are eating at least 45 species of different plants.
That's so crazy. And we just eat the throw out Timothy hay.
And we do one hay, and then maybe they get like something out of a bag, and then they get a salt supplement, and then they don't get to move. And so if we really take all of those things into account, and we look at how they are living when they're just left to their own devices, um, and the rate of ulcers in feral horses is much, much lower. And they do have some statistics and studies on that as well. Um,
I want,
so
oh, go ahead.
yeah, so it's just, I started kind of just playing with these ideas of like, okay, well, if domestic horses are having this much issue, are the wild horses? No, actually, they're not. Like statistically, scientifically, they're not having as much trouble with these issues. So then we kind of have to, we do have to look at where we can make those changes. And science is very helpful, but it's also really helpful to just observe, a wild animal and see, what do they do? What do they eat?
Because wild horses will sit and eat this, and then they'll eat on the ground, and they'll get the dirt from the ground. And so
Right.
the dirt helps their gut cleanse, and they're still eating leaves, and they're eating twigs, and they're eating this. And it's not all green grass out there on the range.
Yeah. So, yes. So, one of the things that I've discovered, and this kind of came from many years of studying like the microbiome as well, and realizing that like horses are living in such sterile environments in most cases, where they're living in environments that are not harboring healthy bacterial systems. It's not an ecosystem that they're living in. They're living in more of a pathogenic bacteria setting, right?
Because even we pull the poop out immediately.
Yeah, so they're peeing and pooping, but the ground is still very sterile. So there's not any like living systems, trees and things feeding into that, and they're not eating off of living soil. They're not getting all of that natural interfacing that they would normally get. And then that 45 different plant species, which is probably actually more than that, that is all prebiotic fiber that helps to diversify the types of bacteria that can live in the GI system as well, right? So then if you kind of zoom out and you realize like it is it's a way bigger can of worms than we can fit into half an hour. But I've really spent a lot of time observing horses in natural settings for the last 5 years, and just observing my own horses as well, and making changes and recording those changes. And I do have over 500 active clients as well who consult with me, and we usually will work on seasonal rotations, and just focusing on seasonal rotations, increasing the types of hay input that they're getting. And a lot of horses are not getting enough fiber in their diet. And that whole conversation with hay analysis and what should be in the hay and how much sugar and how much fiber and all of these things, you really actually can't do that with one kind of hay. So,
And
and speaking of movement, like you have this track system at your place, so you're very familiar with like that paddock paradise.
yeah,
And some people think that they need to have like 100 acres, and they have to have all
no,
of
I have
these.
three, and my house
Yeah,
and the
right.
dogs take and cats take up some of it. So it's
That's a
literally,
perfect example.
yeah, and it's on a hill, so it uses itself.
Yeah, so like even if like going back to what you were saying at the beginning, um, a lot of people are boarding their horses and they don't feel like they have these resources to make this happen for their own horses. And but even in a smaller paddock, like if you have an in-out situation,
Hmm.
there's so much you can do within that paddock that will actually help to increase the steps and the movement and provide enrichment for the horse as well. So I have a really great friend, Jeff. You probably know Alexa Linton from the Whole Horse podcast. She's on the island too. And she just finished a great course on track systems for like building track systems and how to use what you have and how to even if it's something really small, just for increasing those steps and that movement and creating that kind of a space for them so that they can get that more vascular, more movement, better for their feet because their feet have to move in order for them to grow properly. So there's all of these things that can happen just from increasing those steps in their day. So
Oh, I want to go back to something that you mentioned, the word observing. And as an animal communicator, certainly for um, a million years, people will say to me, I don't know whether this is behavior or if there's something physically wrong, but the vet has done a lameness exam and there's nothing wrong. And it usually does come down to like an ulcer. So, what are some of the things like how would if it looks like your horse is eating and pooping normally as normal as you'd think it would be, what are some of the indications, even behaviorally, that maybe something's up?
yeah, there sometimes it can be a little bit subtle, but I always try to help my clients, especially when we're working together. Um, I really feel like people do know their horses and they know them actually better than
Mm,
they think that they do.
exactly.
So when you're seeing them every day, you know when something's not right. And sometimes we don't listen to that, but it's certainly something that horses can teach us, right? It's that, being intuitive and feeling into that intuition is really, really important for, early detection and prevention. So with horses, like anything that seems different, like with their eating, with their manure, even with their energy levels. I notice that energy can go down, even when if you're riding your horse. Changes in their sensitivity, behaviors like seeming like naughty behaviors, like
Yeah, that's the biggest one.
clicking and ducking and rearing or anything, or even, lesser behaviors that people sometimes call naughty or bad. Um, horses don't just do that for no reason. They do it because there's something going on. So they're trying to communicate some kind of discomfort. So a lot of times, if you're looking at your horse from the side too, um, paired with any sort of behavior changes or lingering behaviors that are kind of chronic that your horse is uncomfortable, but you can't put your finger on it. And maybe you've had the vet out and you've done blood testing or you've done lameness testing and it's just all very vague. I mean, Jeff, you probably know, like it can just be so vague sometimes as to what is actually going on because they can't tell us. So,
Yeah.
I'm
Yes.
always
Yeah.
looking at tension in the body. A lot of horses, you can actually see the tension in the abdominal wall somewhere if it's really, really bad. Sometimes if you touch them in certain places, they will flinch or they will flick their tail or they'll turn around and try to bite you. Um, there's all those types of things. And then intermittent diarrhea can be a symptom as well, when they have like kind of fecal water, lots of gas, and then maybe going back and forth from dry manure to diarrhea. All of it, and energy is a big one. Energy
Yeah.
is a really big one. So
That's,
anytime you see an animal that's like, was once very vibrant, dull coat, just kind of, blah. I always am concerned about their GI health. And a lot of times I always try to improve that part, no matter what the person is coming to me with, whatever concern it is. I always try to address that anyway, because it is a pillar for horses to be healthy. Is just, you have to actually work at their gut health to have it be, yeah, it has to be on your radar. So, if you're just feeding, I find most of my clients, I can really help to make a difference just by diversifying, and also being cognizant of that horse's, their lifestyle, their current diet, and all of the, and where can we make just even little changes. You don't have to change everything all at once, because that's just really overwhelming, and it also can be for the horse too. So it's all about making like small changes that are the most, the horse is in the most need of at the time. So if they're really confined, just giving them more space is such a big deal. Or even like,
yeah.
maybe they don't like their neighbor, maybe they don't like the horse that's next to them, maybe, and that's causing them stress or whatever. So I go to all of those places to make sure that this horse is actually comfortable in their bodies, comfortable in their world, because that's kind of where it starts, because we know that ulcers can form pretty quick under
Yeah.
stress,
Yeah.
right?
I've seen the similar thing. And I'm going to bridge it now from dog to horse because I've got experience with both. Our
Yeah.
our current dog has bad food allergies,
Oh yeah.
and his guts periodically flare up. Okay.
Yeah.
The first signal for him flaring up are he doesn't want to cuddle.
Oh,
Right.
Okay, so in other words, he won't come on the couch next to me. He goes over there, right? It's
Yes.
like, oh, buddy. And then, I mean, this took a long time to figure out. It's like, oh, are we going to have diarrhea later on today? Bingo, right? So that was him. The
Yeah.
horse I had, and his name was Amir. I used him just for Western stuff, as I call it. Okay,
Yeah.
and but the thing is, when I had him out, there was a big difference in, as you say, energy. And that is, gee, I'd like to go running up this hill, and he kind of goes, not at the speed you want today, buddy. And
Yeah.
it's like, oh, we're turned down today, right?
Yes.
And so that was the thing that tipped us off that there was something going on. But like I say, it's non-specific. Okay,
Yeah.
you could have said maybe his back's sore today.
Yeah.
mm,
Who knows, right? But the thing is, you're talking about ulcers, and ulcers, whenever most people think of ulcer, they think of the human experience. And that is,
Right.
I have an ulcer because I'm stressed.
Yes.
Okay. How
Yeah.
much does that play a role in horseland?
Well, they have done studies that show that the higher chronic cortisol, like heightened cortisol,
Mhm. Yeah.
will horses with heightened cortisol, often that correlates with uh the level of ulcers that they have. Now, that cortisol can come from any kind of stress. So that could be physical stress, that could be dietary stress, that could be even just the simple thing of going to a horse show and having just that full on overload of, 4 or 5 or 6 days at the horse show in a stall, going, harder than normal and missing all their friends, being in a totally random environment, having to go on a trailer, all of those types of things, they can actually develop an ulcer that quickly, right? So we know that stress has a lot to do with it. Another thing that is a contributing factor is the amount of starch that horses are getting in their diet.
Yeah.
And I think probably lesser recognized, but probably will be more recognized and as more research gets done, is the amount of glyphosate, which is
Yeah.
also known as Roundup. The amount of glyphosate that horses are consuming is proportionate to um, GI distress. So, because it's a patented antibiotic, you're literally feeding your horse an antibiotic every single day when you're feeding these really loaded
Mhm.
crops. And a lot of the, bagged foods that you get just conventionally are made from these top five, soy, sugar beets, wheat, corn, all of these types of things that are just loaded with glyphosate even in small amounts, even if it's just a portion of their diet, it can really make a big
Yeah.
mess in
And
there.
any grain can contain glyphosate, and you see it in, for example, like you say, it's going to be in wheat and corn because they spray it to prevent the
Yeah.
weeds. But you also see it in the pulses, and that is they spray it on them to keep them from going off. It's a desiccant, right?
Yes,
So it's
and
kind of
now
like,
we have
oh,
alfalfa is being sprayed
yeah.
as it as a desiccant, and in the States is worse than in Canada, but we've been having a lot of issues with hay coming up from Washington that's been sprayed with a desiccant and causing a lot of fecal water syndrome in horses, which when you take them off of that hay, it actually will often clear up the fecal water syndrome, which is like a really chronic diarrhea. So basically, it is like sterilizing their hindgut to the point and causing like a hindgut acidosis kind of scenario. So and then sugar beets, a lot of people don't know that sugar beets are sprayed 5 times more than even soy or wheat, because they like a really, really, really sterile soil. So they grow huge when they're the only things that are growing in the soil. So they spray the heck out of it. And a lot of horses are eating sugar beet, like beet pulp of some nature. Some horses are getting buckets full of it every day. And a lot of that is laced with molasses, which is sugary. So you're adding a yeast building thing into the system as well. So you're really messing around with microbiome in the hindgut for horses when we're feeding them all these processed things. So that's another. It is a piece. There's several pieces, but um, those are the movement, the diet, the diversification, and the stress are all like management things that I think we really do need to take a better look at.
What are
It's
some of the healthier hays that, like, there's different hay and people don't realize that.
Yeah, so usually I don't recommend that people use one. I like it when people can use like multiple sources. So there's not really one type of hay that's necessarily the best. If you can offer them some forage, even if it's for an hour a day, or even if you're hand grazing them on some kind of, living space, even if it's half an hour a day, that's a huge bonus. And then just making sure that your hay is not sprayed. And actually have on my website, I have an article on hay analysis and how to read a hay analysis, because a lot of people, they get them, but they don't know what it means. And they know they're looking for a certain number percentage for sugar, but then the rest of it is kind of it's kind of overwhelming. It's a lot of information and it's a lot of different numbers. So what do you do with all of that information? The one thing that I always try to get horse owners to understand is the amount of fiber that your horse is consuming, and whatever is in that hay needs to be relative to the sugar content. So if you are, it's very popular to have a low sugar hay, which everyone's kind of after these low sugar. It's like mostly Timothy hay. But what we're not recognizing is that the uptake of sugar is slowed down and regulated by fiber in the diet. So that is kind of the same for humans. If we don't get enough fiber, we can become diabetic. In horses, it's metabolic disorder and insulin resistance. So there is another whole thing of I'm doing a paper right now on the unfortunate. It's unfortunate because horses are getting these mono diets, so they're actually not getting diverse types of fiber, which is how we would deal with diabetes and insulin issues. And they're only getting one, and maybe they're not getting enough. So diversifying the types of fiber and the amount of fiber that your horse is getting. A lot of horses are not getting enough protein either. So if we see these horses that have a lot of problems keeping their top line and muscle mass, and especially as they get older, a lot of them are not having enough protein in their diet. So, and unfortunately, it's becoming more difficult to get good quality protein into horses because everything is genetically modified and sprayed that has protein in it. So it's definitely challenging. I do have a couple of places in Canada and in the States that I recommend for clean sources of alfalfa and beet pulp as well, which is all, it has to get imported from Europe. But there's a wonderful company in the States that I recommend a lot called WildFed, and that's a really, really amazing brand. It's not as easy to find, but it's a wonderful addition to any horse's diet. And then in Canada, we have in Ontario, there's a place called Ontario DVM, and they do an organic alfalfa cube. And they also do like non-GMO Timothy cubes, and they do non-GMO molasses-free beet pulp as well. So you get the fiber, you can get more calcium with that, and but you don't have that molasses and that glyphosate in there. So there are ways to do it. You just have to know where to go.
Yeah. When you said the non-GMO Timothy, what proportion of Timothy that I would go and buy from the local, we have Buckerfields up here or something. What percentage of that is GMO?
I think it depends on where it comes from. So as far as I'm aware, which it could change and it's always changing, the Timothy that I use, it comes from Calgary. There's quite a few big fields out that way that they guarantee it's no spray. So if they can guarantee that it's no spray, then that's kind of what you're looking for. And then the Ontario DVM, for sure, they have the Tim cubes, and they are guaranteed to be like glyphosate free. And they do testing on them as well. So, but it's not quite the same as using hay. So if you can make friends with your hay suppliers, that is a really good thing to do.
That's how you find out. Okay.
That's how you find out, because
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's kind of like, I know the raw pet food world, it's kind of a wild west in Canada where, there isn't a lot of regulatory stuff.
There's no regulation in Canada, eh?
No, and then with hay for horses, it's just total wild west. And I have talked to a couple of hay suppliers recently who were telling me that they were even having issues with other hay suppliers stealing their hay analysis and then putting their own labels on it and using it for hay that wasn't even
God.
tested hay. So it's like, oh my goodness. So you really do actually have to, like, if you can get to know your hay people, it is obviously a lot better. Um,
There's the thing that we used to do years ago was we used to just buy, if we could, local hay,
yes,
and going for the first cut if you can,
yes,
right? This is what I learned when I went through this thing called vet school. You want to get the hay when it's at 10% bud,
yeah,
right? So you want it leafy, but you
yes,
don't want I'll call it grain on it,
that's
right?
right.
You want it, that's sort of the optimal thing. And a lot of people don't do that. I mean, the best thing you can do is go and get a hay bale,
Yes.
rake it up, and have a look. How much
Yeah.
leaf have I got? How much stem have I got? And is this the stuff that really I want to feed my horse, right?
Well, and also, like, is it last year's hay? Is it three
Yeah,
years
that's the other side.
old?
Yeah.
Is it dusty? Is it moldy? Is it like,
Mm.
there's so many things you can tell just from looking, which is, I have all of that information in my blog. If you happen to have access to, a forage space, you can also do a lot of really fun stuff within that. You can get like ancient grass seed strains that you can add so you can diversify your own space, which is obviously depending on what climate you live in. It's not all year round, but um, like horses eat between 7 and 10 different species of grasses in the wild, so as many different species as you can get. Uh, a lot of people, even if they're feeding 3 or 4 different really good hay sources, like, I find that that is one of the most beneficial things you can do. And then I do a lot of herb rotation as well. So then you're adding a lot more different plants in, and you don't have to do buckets of that stuff. It's just all for extra diversity and fiber. And depending on the animal's constitution, you can really do a lot with herbal input as well, because they know what they're doing with that stuff. They're
They're
not
gonna go find it,
they're herbalists.
find what they need.
Yeah, I think they're actually, like, all the foraging animals are the reason why herbalism even exists in the first place. So it's like
Yeah.
humans just observed what are they eating, and oh, look, they're eating the leaves, and oh, look, now they're eating the roots, and now they're eating this plant. And so I do feel like, and you don't have to go crazy. You don't have to feed like every herb on the planet. You can pick like 2 or 3 at a time and just rotate through different things. And just those tiny little things can make such a big difference. I've seen, behavior changes, digestive changes, just so many, animals that are able to keep their weight on better, have more energy, all of these sorts of things. And there's so much that you can do to customize that as well. So, but starting with a really good base, with some really good forage, obviously is extremely important.
Yeah. Yeah. We always used to look at it where with horses, you don't want them fat. You want them lean and mean,
Yeah,
that type of idea, but with
yeah.
enough muscle as well to show that, yeah, they're thriving, right?
Yeah, and I think a lot of people underestimate or overestimate the condition or body score that their horses currently have.
Mhm.
So a lot of times if I'm doing an online, assessment, I will get them to send me photos of the sides of the horse so I can take a look and see, like, what's the conditioning of this horse, because you can even tell a lot from just where their muscle is or where it's not, if they're holding fat in certain areas of their body and things like, or if they're, a lot of horses that have ulcers tend to be on the skinnier side. They tend not to be able to hold weight because they're not absorbing their nutrients as well. So, you can see, and when you're the owner, sometimes you can be complacent, but when you've seen enough of them, you're like,
Mhm.
I think we should maybe look into this, like
Yeah.
it makes it a little more clear.
Yeah. Do ulcers reduce the appetite enough that you'd figure it out?
No, generally horses
No.
will
Okay.
still want to eat, unless they're like
Okay.
colicking or something. But I tend to notice it's more in the bot, like you see more like dullness in the coat.
Mm.
And like I said
Mm,
before, like a
okay.
lot of
Yeah.
energy issues and sometimes like a lot of grumpiness, especially if they have ulcers, because they're very uncomfortable, especially under saddle because we're, girthing them and tightening that area and then using our legs on that area. If you're using spurs, God forbid, like you're just all in that area, right? So the horse is generally not being bad. They're actually just uncomfortable.
And
So
responding.
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's when you have to communicate with them, right, Joan?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Then you have to get in there and be like, your horse is trying to tell you his stomach hurts.
Exactly. That's my job.
That's an amazing job to have.
Okay. No, I mean, this is it very, I mean, the thing is, it's a hidden disease. We miss it
Yeah.
so much, right? And so we've got to have our eyes open. But the other side, and I like what you pointed out, is because of the management that we've put horses under
Mhm.
that we're seeing these problems. Okay.
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean, we had another speaker who was talking about the wild horses,
Mhm.
as in, herds that are out there running around, having a wonderful time, and it's like, yeah, that's what horses were made for,
Yeah.
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then we start looking at how we've done it, and when you see horses sort of lined up in stalls and that's it.
Mm.
My sister and brother-in-law, they had standardbreds, but
Oh
they
yeah.
also had 10 acres.
Right.
And so what they did is they had them installed, I mean, overnight and things like that. But during the day, they kicked them out, and they had, I think, about a 5 acre pasture, with
Yeah.
trees in it and all kinds of different things, so they could go and hide in there and do
And
stuff.
be a herd.
And they were a herd. I mean, it was a herd of about
Yeah.
five, yeah, but it was a
That's still
herd.
a herd.
Yeah, still a herd.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So
and all those things are really important, and those are actually like fundamental needs of horses. And if we're not meeting those basic needs, and then we're asking them to do these very intense and rigorous jobs for us in, the show ring or whatever, and jumping and whatever we're doing with them,
Fancy
um,
dancing.
bodies just fall apart,
yeah,
and they're not
yeah.
able to be horses and express themselves as the species that they are. I think there is a big movement now that is kind of in the direction of like, horses aren't here for our amusement. They're here to teach us and to, they are our companions, but they also really are, they have these needs that we need to actually honor them. And, especially historically, like horses have been there through us through wars and, all of these events. They've almost kind of shaped civilization in a way.
Total. I write about that in all my books that we wouldn't be here without the horse.
Right.
We couldn't
Right.
be here without the horse. And one
Yes.
of the things I want to add to that is that, yeah, they teach us some stuff, but they're also here for themselves and for their own reasons that we could never even begin to know. And the more that we honor that, give them agency and set them up to be in the world they're supposed to be in, even if it's only 3 acres, or even if it is an in and out stall, but you've got enrichment, then we're all golden. We're all happy.
Yeah, and then I mean, if you are providing enrichment, like, between you and your horse, like me and my horse at this point in our relationship, we do tons of groundwork, like
Yeah,
just tons of, and positive reinforcement and flag training and like most of the stuff that we do is not under saddle. And we do under saddle stuff, but he was a show horse at one point and it was so stressful for him. And I just was like, okay, I'm shutting this down because he doesn't like doing this. This is not fun for me. It's not fun for him. And we're just going to make everything really, really fun because we both got really fried. And I was like, this is not the point of having a horse for me. And everything that I have learned about nutrition and all of those things has been from all of these like difficult situations that I've had with my own horses, where I'm just really just not listening to them,
but
and
you
I
are listening because now you've got the screwy job.
right, exactly. So, but yeah, it takes like you got to have humility and you got to be willing to change and you really have to have empathy for them and realize like, okay, so I have this animal, but it's not all about me, right?
Right. That, amen,
It,
sister.
it can be hard sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's a good way to bring it right back to it. And that is we've got to be observant and we've got to appreciate what the horses want to do.
right.
That's it. Any
And they
final?
all have a job, no matter who they are, what they are, like if they have limitations, they all have a purpose and they all have something they're really good at and they all have something to teach us. So,
That's a great way. That's pretty well. I was going to say if you have any final thoughts, and I think you nailed it right there.
Yeah.
yeah, they basically have taught me the majority about, humility, about, changing trajectory, being dynamic, being adaptive, being resilient. It's always been them that has been able to like put me through the hard lesson. And they're like, come on, you got to get this lesson. And then you just have to drop all of your plans and because that's kind of life, right?
Yeah.
Really, really good at that.
That's a good way. Okay, so you've sort of exposed all this stuff that you have available in here,
Yeah.
Sarah. And so if people want to get hold of you, how do they do that?
I have a website. It's the animalsynergist.com. And I on there, I do have a free gift that I just put on there for the purpose of this conference and for people to kind of get
Okay.
started with all of these concepts that I've been talking about. I have an ebook on equine nutrition that people can download. Just enter your email address and join my mailing list,
Okay.
and you get a free PDF of the just some of the basic things that they may not be so basic, and you may find some useful information to apply to your horse like immediately. It's just a really good assessment tool. And then I have a really extensive blog on the website, tons of different articles on there, lots of scientific references. And if you want to dive into more about like the wild horse research and the ulcer research, and I have all of that cited on the blog and on my articles in there.
Great.
It's a great site.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you very much. Joan, any final thoughts from you on this topic?
No, I love all of it. I love her start with wildlife and apply, the application and the practical application of something that's right in front of us.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
that to me is we can be all book learned, but at the end of the day, it comes back to the word she kept using, observe. Like observe your own horses,
Yeah.
observe, you know.
Yeah.
Part of it.
The thing is, we're talking about horses, but it applies to all the animals,
And
Yes.
ourselves.
and ourselves. I mean, you talk about enrichment, and then we talk about there's a thing called the Indoor Cat Initiative.
Right.
And that is when you have cats that are confined in houses, you've
Yeah.
got to enrich them or else they're going to have problems.
I have a catio. My catio looks at my horse track.
Oh, that's
We all
Perfect.
have dinner.
watch their horsey
That's,
TV.
that's getting the
Yeah.
species together.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for coming on board, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was
Yeah.
great chatting.
Thank you.
It's great. And so if anyone wants to get more information on what Sarah's talking about in terms of your horses having a better life and being healthier for it, make sure you check out our website. I've got the link below for you. And so thank you for watching, and we'll catch you in the next webinar.